At her 25th birthday, the council forced her to marry the Alpha King. Just to save their pack, the first light of dawn spilled softly across the hills surrounding Lyra's pack. The forest below was alive with morning mist, curling among the ancient trees like ghostly ribbons. Birds sang their fragile songs, and somewhere in the distance, a river murmured over smooth stones. It was a peaceful morning, and yet Lyra could feel the weight pressing down on her chest. Today was her 25th birthday, but birthdays had never been simple for her. They were reminders of duty, of expectation, of the life she had not chosen. Lyra stirred in her room, the scent of pine and wildflowers drifting in through the open window. She brushed her dark hair from her face and looked at her reflection in the small hand mirror. Her eyes, the gray of storm clouds, held a storm inside them too: anger, frustration, longing. She had grown up as the daughter of the council, trained in both knowledge and diplomacy, but always aware that her life belonged to her pack, not to herself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Lyra," came the voice of Elder Marin, one of the oldest and wisest in the council. "The council awaits you. Please come quickly." Lyra's stomach tightened. She knew what this could mean. The council rarely summoned her unless matters were grave. Something in Marin's tone told her that whatever awaited her was not merely advice or celebration. She dressed quickly in a simple gown of deep green, the color of the forest in spring, and walked through the stone corridors toward the council chamber. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting the history of her pack, of leaders who had fought and sacrificed to protect their people. Today, she would make history too, though perhaps not the kind she wanted. The chamber was colder than she expected, filled with the council members seated around a wide stone table. Their eyes turned to her as she entered. Some were kind, some stern, but all carried the same weight: expectation. "Lyra," Elder Marin began, her voice gentle but firm. "Your 25th birthday is a milestone, but we cannot celebrate it lightly. Your pack faces a danger that requires your sacrifice." Lyra's heart thumped in her chest. She had expected something serious, but the words were still jarring. "Danger?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "What kind of danger?" A younger counselor, Taryn, spoke up, his eyes dark with concern. "The Alpha King of the neighboring kingdom, Kale, has threatened to destroy our lands if we do not comply with his demands. He is powerful, and his pack is loyal and vast. We cannot withstand him without help." Lyra's breath caught. She had heard whispers of Kale, of his strength, of the mysterious curse that haunted his bloodline. He was known as cold, unforgiving, and nearly untouchable. And now the council's plan was clear. "To prevent war," Elder Marin continued, "you must marry Kale. Your union is the only way to ensure the survival of our people." The words hung in the air like a sharp frost. Lyra felt as if the floor had fallen out beneath her. Marry Kale. She had spent 25 years learning to command respect, to navigate politics, to serve her pack. And now her choice was taken from her. I cannot," she whispered. "I have never even met him. How can I marry someone I do not know?" "You will meet him soon enough," Taryn said. His voice was calm but unyielding. "You have no other options. Your duty is to your pack, Lyra. This is the path we must take." Lyra felt a surge of anger, but also a cold, deep fear. The council's words were final. There was no room for negotiation. The life she had imagined for herself, quiet, free, perhaps even happy, was slipping away. And yet she knew they were right. If she refused, her pack could face annihilation. The chamber seemed to spin around her as she was escorted to the carriage that would take her to Kale's kingdom. The morning sun glinted off the polished wood, and the horses' hooves clattered on the stone path. Lyra's mind raced. She had heard stories of Kale's kingdom, a fortress built of black stone where moonlight barely touched the halls, and where loyalty and obedience were prized above all else. She wondered what he would be like. Would he be cruel? Would he despise her as much as she feared him? Hours passed in tense silence as the carriage wound through the forested hills. Lyra's thoughts kept returning to Kale. She imagined him standing tall, commanding, his presence filling a room even before he spoke. She imagined his eyes dark, piercing, unreadable, and the way he might look at her as if weighing her worth. And yet beneath the fear there was an undeniable curiosity. What did he hide behind that mask of power? Finally, the carriage reached the gates of Kale's kingdom. Towering spires of black stone stretched into the sky, their tips shrouded in clouds. Guards in silver and black armor saluted as the carriage passed, their faces impassive, revealing nothing. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. Inside the castle, the air was cool and still. Tapestries depicted battles and victories, creatures both human and supernatural, and the bloodline of Kale's ancestors. Every detail seemed designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind visitors of the power they were in the presence of. Lyra was led to a grand hall where Kale awaited. He stood near a large window, the moonlight casting silver across his dark hair and strong features. He was taller than she expected, his posture regal, his expression unreadable. When he turned his gaze toward her, Lyra felt as if the world had shifted. His eyes, deep and stormy, seemed to look straight into her soul. "Lyra," Kale said, his voice low and calm, yet commanding attention. "You are here. I have heard much about you." Lyra curtsied slightly, feeling a flutter of nervousness. "Your Majesty." Kale's eyes studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once sharply. "We are bound by duty," he said. "I do not know what awaits us, but we must face it together." Lyra's throat tightened. There was no warmth in his words, no promises of kindness, but there was something unspoken, like a thread connecting them through the vast distance of duty and expectation. Days passed, and Lyra began to learn the rhythms of Kale's kingdom. She attended ceremonies, learned the rules of the court, and navigated the subtle games of loyalty and power. Kale watched her, often silently, sometimes with a question in his eyes. He tested her intelligence, her courage, and her patience. At first, Lyra resented every glance, every command, every expectation. But slowly, she began to notice small moments. Kale pausing to ensure she was safe. A shadow of a smile when she cleverly solved a courtly puzzle, the way he looked at her as if he recognized her strength. One evening she found herself in the palace gardens, moonlight spilling over the fountains and statues. She was lost in thought when Kale appeared silently beside her. "You walk here often," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I like the quiet," she replied. "It feels different from the halls of the council, less demanding." Kale studied her. "You are stronger than most," he said quietly, "and wiser than I expected." Lyra felt her cheeks warm, a small spark of pride and defiance rising within her. "Do not expect me to yield easily," she said. Kale's lips curved barely into the hint of a smile. "I would not dream of it," he said. For a moment the tension between them softened, replaced by something fragile, unspoken. Both of them were bound by duty, by expectation, by the impossible weight of their roles. But in that brief silence, they were simply two people, standing under the same moon, caught between fear, curiosity, and longing. That night, as Lyra lay in her chamber, she could not stop thinking about Kale. She wondered what lay behind his cold exterior, what pain or fear shaped him, what dreams he might hide. And she realized with both excitement and dread that her life had changed forever. She was no longer merely the daughter of the council. She was a bride, a pawn, a potential partner in a power she did not yet understand. And Kale was more than she had imagined. Not cruel but complex, not untouchable but human. And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt the dangerous stirrings of hope. Yet, even as she closed her eyes, a whisper of warning ran through her mind. The path ahead would not be easy. Love, duty, and survival would collide in ways she could not yet imagine. And in the shadows of Kale's kingdom, secrets waited, secrets that could bind them together, or tear them apart forever. The dawn came again, pale and uncertain, and Lyra knew that the story of her 25th year was only just beginning. Cliffhanger. In the quiet of the night, Cale stood at his window, watching the moonlight touch Lyra's chamber. He could not name the feeling stirring in his chest, but he knew one thing. The woman he was supposed to control had already begun to change him, and the danger lurking beyond the walls was only the beginning. The sun rose over Cale's kingdom, casting a pale gold glow over the black stone towers. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the forest beyond the walls. Lyra stood at the balcony of her chamber, looking down at the courtyard below. Servants hurried along the cobblestone paths, carrying trays of food and scrolls, their movements precise and quiet. The castle was alive, yet it felt like a place built to command, not to comfort. Lyra had spent the past few days trying to understand this new world, its rules, its rituals, its invisible lines of loyalty. Every glance from Cale reminded her of her place, but also of her growing curiosity. He moved through the halls with a calm authority, each gesture measured, each word deliberate. It was impossible to tell what he thought, what he felt, or what he planned. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. "Enter," she called. Cale stepped into the room, his figure framed by the doorway. The morning light caught in his dark hair, making it appear almost silver at the edges. He held a folded scroll in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," Lyra said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. Cale's gaze lingered on her, sharp and assessing. "Morning," he replied. Then, after a pause, he held out the scroll. "You will need to learn this." Lyra took it, her fingers brushing his briefly. A spark of warmth passed between them, fleeting but undeniable. She unrolled the scroll to find a list of rules, duties, and traditions she was expected to follow in the palace. Every line reminded her that her presence here was not just about survival, it was about control, obedience, and politics. "I will try," she said, looking up at him. "I want to understand your world." Cale inclined his head slightly. "Good. Understanding is the first step. But remember, appearances can be deceiving. Not everyone in this kingdom will welcome you." Lyra frowned. "Why would anyone oppose me? I have come to help, not harm." Cale's eyes softened for a brief moment, though his voice remained steady. "Help is often seen as a threat when power is at stake. You will learn." For the next several hours, Cale guided Lyra through the palace, teaching her the names of servants, the paths to each chamber, and the rules of protocol. Every gesture was a lesson in control, yet every glance he gave her was heavy with something unspoken: curiosity, respect, perhaps even admiration. By midday, Lyra felt both exhausted and exhilarated. There was so much to learn, so many layers to this world, and Cale was a patient but exacting teacher. She found herself both frustrated and intrigued by him. He demanded her attention, yet he also allowed moments of quiet, moments where she could glimpse a side of him no one else might see. That evening, the palace was bathed in silver light from the moon. Lyra wandered the halls, drawn by a sense of restlessness she could not explain. She found herself in the library, a vast room filled with shelves of ancient texts. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the light as she ran her fingers along the spines. Knowledge had always been a comfort to her, a place where she could feel in control. A shadow fell across the floor, and Lyra looked up to see Cale standing in the doorway. "You should not wander alone," he said softly. "I needed air," she replied, not moving. "And the library is quiet." Cale stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "The library is not dangerous, but some corridors are. You must remember your place and your limits." Lyra met his gaze, unafraid. "Perhaps I am stronger than you think." Cale's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps," he said, "but strength alone is not enough. Wisdom, patience, and understanding are what keep you safe here." For a long moment they stood in silence. The library seemed to shrink around them, the distance between them charged with tension. Neither spoke, but both felt the unspoken connection growing. It was a dangerous curiosity, a pull neither wanted to acknowledge fully. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra began to find her rhythm within Kale's kingdom. She attended councils, learned the history of his people, and navigated the subtle politics that shaped every interaction. Yet, no matter how much she adapted, Kale remained a puzzle. He was kind in unexpected ways, pausing to answer a question, offering guidance, or allowing her small freedoms. But he was also distant, reminding her at every turn that their union was a duty, not a choice. One afternoon, Kale summoned her to the palace gardens. The sun was high, casting patterns of light and shadow through the tall trees. Flowers bloomed in careful rows, and the air was heavy with fragrance. Lyra found him standing near the fountain, his reflection rippling in the water. "You have adapted well," Kale said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of approval. Lyra curtsied lightly. "I am trying my best. It is different from my home, but I want to understand." Kale nodded, his eyes tracing the curve of the fountain. "Understanding is only the first step. Trust and respect come later, and they must be earned." Lyra stepped closer, emboldened by the quiet intimacy of the garden. "I am willing to learn if you will allow it." Kale's gaze met hers, dark and intense. "And if the world does not allow it? If your people are in danger and I must make choices you do not understand?" Lyra's heart clenched. "Then we will face it together. That is what we must do, is it not?" Kale's expression softened slightly, but the tension in his posture remained. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "perhaps together is enough." That night the palace seemed quieter than usual. Lyra sat by the window, looking out at the moonlit courtyard. The stars shone brightly, but the weight of her duty pressed heavily on her. She thought of Kale, of the tension between them, of the impossible choices that lay ahead. And yet there was a spark of something new, hope, curiosity, perhaps even the beginnings of trust. The next morning, a message arrived from Kale's counselors. A rival kingdom had sent envoys, demanding a meeting. Lyra was instructed to accompany Kale. She felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. This would be her first test, not just of her knowledge and diplomacy, but of her courage. The hall where the meeting took place was grand, with high ceilings and banners that told stories of old victories. Kale stood at the head of the table, commanding attention with a single glance. Lyra took her place beside him, feeling the weight of both her duty and the unspoken bond that was beginning to form between them. The meeting began, formal and tense. Words were exchanged, carefully chosen, with the slightest misstep capable of sparking conflict. Lyra observed silently, learning the subtle cues of power, the rise and fall of voices, the tilt of a head, the glance that conveyed far more than words ever could. Throughout the meeting, Kale's eyes occasionally flicked to her, assessing her reactions, noting her courage and intelligence. And she, in turn, found herself studying him, not as a king to obey, but as a man she was beginning to understand. His strength was not just in power, but in restraint, in the careful measure of his actions, in the silent intensity that shaped everything around him. When the meeting ended, Lyra felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had survived the trial, and in some ways she had proven herself, not just to Kale, but to herself. For the first time, she realized that her strength was not just in obedience or knowledge, but in courage, in insight, in the willingness to stand beside someone as formidable as Kale. That evening, she wandered the palace gardens again, her thoughts heavy with the events of the day. The moon rose, casting silver light over the fountains and statues. Lyra felt a presence beside her and turned to find Kale standing quietly, watching her. "You handled yourself well today," he said softly. Lyra smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." Kale's lips curved in a subtle, rare smile. "Perhaps, but you have more courage than most. That is admirable." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a dangerous but welcome sensation. For the first time, she sensed that the bond between them was more than duty. Something was growing, delicate, fragile, and terrifying in its power. Yet as she looked at Kale, she could not shake a whisper of warning. The path ahead would not be simple. There were forces, political, supernatural, and personal, that threatened to test them both. And in the quiet of the moonlit gardens, Lyra realized that the fire between them was only just beginning to burn. Cliffhanger. That night, as Lyra drifted to sleep, a shadow moved through the palace corridors. Eyes unseen watched her, intentions unclear, and a whisper of danger carried through the halls. Lyra and Kale's fragile trust would soon be tested in ways neither could foresee, and the choices they made next could change their lives forever. The wind howled softly across the black stone towers of Kale's kingdom, carrying the faint scent of pine and the distant river that wound through the forest. The moon hung low and silver, casting its light across the courtyards and gardens, turning every shadow into a secret waiting to be discovered. Lyra stood at the edge of the balcony, her fingers wrapped around the cold stone railing. Her mind was restless, her heart heavy with unspoken thoughts. Since arriving in Kale's kingdom, her days had been filled with lessons, ceremonies, and subtle tests of her courage and intelligence. She had learned to navigate the intricate rules of the court, to read the hidden expressions of those around her, and to anticipate the intentions behind every word spoken. But it was the quiet moments, stolen from duty and expectation, that weighed most heavily on her mind. Kale had become a constant presence in those moments, not in the way of a lover or friend, but as an enigma she could not stop thinking about. He moved through the palace with calm authority, yet there were moments when his gaze softened, when his silence seemed less like distance and more like longing. And Lyra found herself drawn to him, not merely out of curiosity, but out of a deep, unspoken connection that both frightened and thrilled her. One evening, Kale summoned her to the library. The room was vast, filled with shelves of ancient texts, the scent of parchment heavy in the air. Candles flickered in their sconces, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Lyra entered cautiously, her footsteps quiet on the polished floor. Kale was already there, seated at a large table with scrolls spread before him. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable. Yet as he looked up and saw her, something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of relief, or perhaps anticipation. "You came," he said simply. Lyra nodded, her curiosity piqued. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," Kale replied, his voice low and steady. "There is something you should understand, something I have not yet told you." Lyra stepped closer, her heart beating faster. "What is it?" Kale paused, choosing his words carefully. "My bloodline carries a burden," he said, "a curse that affects those who grow close to me. It has shaped my life, my choices, and the way I protect those I care about. I have kept everyone at a distance to prevent harm, to prevent loss. I did not expect to feel drawn to anyone." Lyra's breath caught. The man she had been learning to understand, the man whose presence had begun to stir something deep within her, carried a pain she had not imagined. She reached out, hesitating only briefly before letting her hand brush his. "I am not afraid," she said softly. "I do not care for curses or burdens. I care for the man I see now." Kale's eyes darkened, conflicted. "That is dangerous," he whispered, "for both of us. I should keep my distance." "And yet," Lyra replied, "you do not. You are here, you care." For a long moment, silence filled the room, thick and heavy with the weight of unspoken feelings. And then Kale allowed the faintest of smiles to touch his lips, a rare, almost imperceptible curve that lit his stormy eyes. "Perhaps," he murmured, "we are both stronger than we know." The days that followed were filled with a delicate tension, a dance of emotions neither fully understood. Lyra learned to anticipate Kale's moods, to read the subtle signals he gave when words were unnecessary. And Kale, in turn, found himself noticing her in ways that startled him, her courage, her intelligence, the way she faced challenges without fear, the way she refused to bow completely to duty without understanding. One afternoon, they walked together in the palace gardens. The trees swayed gently in the wind and the flowers released their delicate fragrance into the air. Lyra walked a few steps behind Kale, her hands clasped in front of her. "You have grown accustomed to this place," Kale observed, his voice quiet. "I have," Lyra admitted. "But it is still strange and sometimes lonely. I feel as though I am always watched, always tested." Kale nodded. "That is the nature of power," he said, "and of duty. You will always be watched, and yet you handle it well." Lyra looked up at him, curious. "Do you trust me?" Kale's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "I am learning," he said carefully. "Trust is not given lightly in my world, but you have earned glimpses of it." The moment was interrupted by the sound of rustling leaves. A young servant hurried past, bowing respectfully but glancing nervously at Lyra. Kale's eyes followed the servant, then returned to Lyra. "Even here," he said softly, "you are never truly alone. Danger is always near." Lyra's heart tightened. "Then we must be careful and ready." Kale's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes, and yet we cannot live in fear. We must find moments of understanding, even amid uncertainty." They walked in silence for a time, the unspoken connection between them deepening with every step. And though neither spoke of it directly, both felt the growing bond, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and something more fragile, yet undeniable. That night, Lyra sat by her window, the moonlight spilling across the floor. She could hear Kale moving in the halls, his steps quiet but deliberate. Her thoughts drifted to him, to the tension that had grown between them, to the glimpses of vulnerability she had seen behind his guarded expression. She wondered what it would mean to truly know him, to step beyond duty and expectation. And she realized that fear had begun to transform into something else, something like hope, like trust, like the first stirrings of affection. The following days brought new challenges. The rival kingdom continued to send messages, their tone increasingly demanding. Lyra was called to assist in negotiations, a test of her diplomacy and courage. She found herself standing beside Kale in the grand hall, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on both of them. "Remember," Kale whispered before the meeting, "we are not just defending our people. We are proving that trust and cooperation are possible, even in a world built on fear." Lyra nodded, her heart steady. "I understand, and I will not fail." The meeting itself was tense. Words were chosen carefully, expressions measured, and every gesture scrutinized. Lyra listened intently, offering her observations when appropriate, surprising even Kale with her insight. For the first time, she felt not like a pawn, but like a partner, someone whose intelligence and courage could influence events. After the meeting, Kale and Lyra walked back through the gardens. The moonlight painted the fountain silver and the air was heavy with the scent of flowers. "You handled yourself well today," Kale said quietly. Lyra smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." Kale's eyes softened. "And yet you also have your own strength. That is what makes you remarkable. Courage, intelligence, wisdom, they are not given lightly." Lyra felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation that was both frightening and comforting. She realized that their bond was no longer just about duty. It was growing into something more, something that demanded recognition and understanding. The quiet intimacy between them grew in stolen moments, shared meals in the gardens, whispered conversations in the library, and silent walks under the moonlight. Each moment was charged with a delicate tension, a mixture of fear and longing, of duty and desire. Yet even as their connection deepened, danger lingered. A shadow moved through the palace corridors, watching, waiting. Lyra sensed it, though she could not see it, and a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. One night as she prepared for bed, a message arrived, a sealed letter from an unknown sender. Lyra hesitated, then opened it carefully. The words were simple but chilling. "Trust is a fragile thing. Beware those who smile too easily. Your choices will change everything. Her heart raced. She glanced toward Kale's chambers, imagining him already asleep, unaware of the warning that had come for them both. She felt a surge of determination. Whatever danger approached, she would face it. And she would do so with Kale by her side, even if the world demanded otherwise. That night, as she lay awake, Lyra thought of Kale, of the bond growing between them, and of the shadow that lingered in the corners of their world. The path ahead would not be simple. But for the first time, she felt ready to face it, not just as a daughter of the council, but as a partner, a companion, and perhaps even as someone capable of love. Cliffhanger. As the moonlight touched her face, Lyra sensed a presence outside her window. Someone or something was watching the palace. Kale's protective instinct would soon awaken, and the trials of trust, courage, and emotion would test them both in ways they could never have imagined. The wind swept through the black stone towers of Kale's kingdom, carrying with it the scent of pine, damp earth, and the distant river that twisted through the forest. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the courtyards and gardens. Tonight, the palace seemed alive with a quiet tension, as if it too sensed the storm approaching. Lyra stood on the balcony of her chamber, her hands gripping the cold stone railing. She could feel the weight of everything pressing upon her, her pack, her duty, Kale, and the unseen forces lurking in the shadows. For weeks, danger had lingered in quiet corners, whispering warnings she could barely understand. Now it was no longer a whisper. Kale approached silently, his dark cloak brushing the floor. Even in the moonlight, he was a striking figure, tall, commanding, and yet somehow more human than he had ever appeared. His eyes, stormy and intense, met hers, and she felt the pull between them stronger than ever. "You are awake," he said softly. "I cannot sleep," Lyra admitted. "I feel something is coming, something we must face." Kale nodded, his gaze scanning the courtyard below. "Yes, the threats that linger in shadow have grown bolder. We cannot delay any longer." Lyra felt a surge of resolve. "Then we face it together," she said firmly. Kale's eyes softened, and for a moment the tension in his posture melted. "Together," he repeated. The first signs of the threat appeared at dawn. A group of emissaries arrived at the palace gates, their banners dark against the morning sky. They carried not weapons but words, demands, ultimatums, and veiled threats meant to unsettle Kale and Lyra. In the grand hall, Kale stood at the head of the table, Lyra at his side. Together they listened to the emissaries' proclamations, exchanged careful words, and navigated the delicate balance between diplomacy and authority. "You have grown strong," Kale whispered to Lyra during a brief pause. "Not just in courage, but in understanding. Your presence changes more than you realize." Lyra's heart warmed at his words. "And your presence changes me," she replied softly. The emissaries' visit ended without immediate conflict, but the shadow of danger had deepened. Lyra felt it in the corridors, in the way servants hurried silently, and in the way Kale's eyes never left her. She knew that their bond, delicate and growing, would soon be tested. That evening, Kale led Lyra to the palace gardens. The moonlight painted the fountains and statues in silver, the scent of flowers thick in the air. Lyra felt a mixture of fear and anticipation, knowing that the challenges they faced would require both courage and trust. "Lyra," Kale said quietly, "there is something you must understand about my curse. It is not just a danger to me, but to anyone I care for. The closer someone becomes, the more they risk being caught in the consequences of my bloodline." Lyra met his gaze, unflinching. "I know," she said, "and yet I choose to stand with you. Even knowing the risks, I will not turn away." Kale's eyes softened and he stepped closer. "You are braver than anyone I have ever known, and yet I fear for you, fear that your courage will not be enough." Lyra reached out, placing her hand over his. "We will find a way, together. That is enough." For the first time, Kale allowed himself to believe it. Their bond was no longer just duty or politics. It was trust, respect, and the fragile beginnings of love. But even as they embraced the warmth of connection, the shadows of danger moved closer. The next day brought the ultimate test. The rival kingdom had summoned a council of supernatural forces, witches, emissaries, and enchanted advisors, all seeking to pressure Kale and Lyra into submission. The grand hall was filled with tension, every whisper and glance carrying weight. Kale stood at the head of the table, his posture unyielding, while Lyra stood beside him, her presence both a statement and a shield. Together, they faced the council, their combined strength more formidable than either had anticipated. At one point, a member of the council spoke harshly, questioning Kale's ability to protect his people. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Strength is not measured by fear," she said, "but by the courage to face what is just, even when it is difficult. Kale has protected his kingdom and he will protect ours. Together, we are stronger than your doubts." A murmur spread through the hall. The counselors exchanged glances, some wary, some impressed. Kale's eyes met Lyra's, and in that moment no words were needed. She had proven herself, not just in courage but in wisdom, and he knew he could trust her. As the council meeting concluded, Kale and Lyra retreated to the gardens. The air was cool, and the moonlight shimmered across the fountains. Lyra felt the weight of exhaustion but also the thrill of accomplishment. "You have done more than survive," Kale said, his voice low and full of admiration. "You have proven that your strength is not just in obedience, but in understanding, courage, and heart." Lyra smiled, feeling a warmth that spread through her chest. "And you have shown me that strength can be gentle when it chooses to be." Kale's gaze lingered on her, and for the first time, he allowed the vulnerability he had long hidden to surface. "I have kept many at a distance," he said quietly, "but you have changed that, and I am not sure I can go back." Lyra reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his. "Nor would I want you to," she whispered. The next challenge came swiftly. The rival kingdom's emissaries had not given up. They sent a messenger with a warning. Betrayal was possible even within the walls of Kale's kingdom. Lyra and Kale knew that caution was required, but they also knew that hiding from the world would not protect their people, nor their growing bond. They devised a plan to reveal the truth behind the threats, to face the rival kingdom not with fear, but with courage and strategy. Lyra's intelligence and knowledge of her own pack's traditions proved invaluable. Kale, in turn, displayed the strength and wisdom that had made him a leader feared and respected across the lands. Together, they confronted the emissaries, presenting evidence of hidden plots and challenging accusations. The rival kingdom had expected fear, hesitation, and weakness, but they were met with unity, strength, and the undeniable bond between Kale and Lyra. The emissaries departed, their faces betraying surprise, respect, and a grudging acknowledgement of defeat. For the first time, the palace felt lighter, the shadow over the kingdom lifting slightly. Lyra and Kale walked together through the gardens, the moonlight bathing them in silver. "You were remarkable," Kale said softly. "I could not have faced them without you." Lyra shook her head gently. "We faced them together. That is what matters." Kale's gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "And yet there is more to face. Danger will always return. But tonight I choose to stand with you, not as a ruler or a protector, but as someone who trusts you." Lyra felt her heart swell. "And I choose to stand with you, Kale. No matter what comes." In the quiet of the night, they sat by the fountain, sharing stories, thoughts, and small confessions. The bond between them had grown stronger, not just through duty or survival, but through understanding, courage, and trust. For the first time, they could imagine a future together, one where their strengths complemented each other, and where their bond was not just necessity but choice. The dawn brought a new light, both literal and symbolic. The rival kingdom had retreated, the palace corridors were filled with quiet confidence, and the bond between Kale and Lyra was stronger than ever. They had faced the shadows together and emerged with trust, understanding, and the beginnings of a love that promised to endure. Lyra stood on the balcony once more, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the towers. Cale joined her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "We have faced much," he said quietly, "and yet I feel as though we are only beginning." Lyra smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "Yes, but whatever comes, we will face it together." Cale's lips curved in a rare, genuine smile. "Together," he repeated, as if sealing a promise not just to the world but to each other. The wind carried the scent of pine and the river. The sun warmed the black stone towers, and the palace seemed alive with the quiet strength of those who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. Cale and Lyra stood side by side, not just as rulers, but as partners, companions, and two souls bound by courage, trust, and an unspoken, enduring bond. 6,089 words, 35,773 characters detect, even the most difficult to spot writing mistakes. What is word counter? Apart from counting words and characters, our online editor can help you to improve word choice and writing style, and optionally, help you to detect grammar mistakes and plagiarism. To check word count, simply place your cursor into the text box above and start typing. You'll see the number of characters and words increase or decrease as you type, delete, and edit them. You can also copy and paste text from another program over into the online editor above. The auto-save feature will make sure you won't lose any changes while editing, even if you leave the site and come back later. Tip: bookmark this page now. Knowing the word count of a text can be important. For example, if an author has to write a minimum or maximum amount of words for an article, essay, report, story, book, paper, you name it, word counter will help to make sure its word count reaches a specific requirement or stays within a certain limit. In addition, word counter shows you the top 10 keywords and keyword density of the article you're writing. This allows you to know which keywords you use how often and at what percentages. This can prevent you from overusing certain words or word combinations, and check for best distribution of keywords in your writing. In the details overview, you can see the average speaking and reading time for your text. While reading level is an indicator of the education level a person would need in order to understand the words you're using. Disclaimer: we strive to make our tools as accurate as possible, but we cannot guarantee it will always be so. How it works. Keyword Densitix 1x2x3. Sitemap.